I made this side table a couple weeks ago, and this past weekend I was tasked with making it bigger into a coffee table. So I got this 8/4 slab of walnut, and I'm gonna make a couple extra legs and some rails, attach it to the old table, and then move the existing top to a lower shelf. So I started by taking the top off and then cutting some new legs. So I just double checked the dimensions and used that measurement to set up the fence to rip the new legs. And then I did the same thing for the rails. I checked the old ones, set up the fence, cut them to length and width. And then I had some longer ones to do, so I did the same thing again. And then I cut them to the correct length on the crosscut sled. And then I cut the legs to length on the crosscut sled and used the main fence as a stop. I did a dry fit with everything and kind of tried to figure out how I wanted to do the lower shelves. So I decided to cut a radius out of the bigger slab there, the cookie, using the jigsaw. And it came out with a really nice clean cut. I was really happy with that, but the connection didn't really work because this other cookie was not quite square. So I brought it over to the shopsmith and used the disc sander to square up that edge, and I can't believe I didn't have a disc sander this long. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. Look how great that joint is now. Perfect. So then I moved over to the router, plunge router, and used this mini mortising jig that I built a few weeks ago based on 3x3 customs plans. So I started with doing the side of the legs, adding some mortises. So I started plunging on one side, brought it up, and then brought it down to the other side, and then went across, kind of connecting the dots. You can see right here. So I did a little quick test fit with the legs and the rails. Looks really good. So then I moved over to the existing table and cut some mortises. This got a little tricky. I had to do some creative clamping. So the first one wasn't too bad. I could use the kind of base, but then I had to take that off and kind of use some scrap wood to kind of just span the edge and clamp it. It was a little awkward, but it worked out. And the third one was even harder. I didn't even get a good shot of it because it was such a chaotic mess clamping it. So I did a dry fit, and then I added glue, dropped it into the pony clamps, and then I set up the rails. I'm not sure why I did it vertically, but it seemed to work out. So you can see it there all stacked up awkwardly and clamped. Got a little out of square, so I cut a scrap piece of pine, stuck in there to make sure it stayed square while it was drying. And then I dropped in the cookies while it was still wet, just in case they didn't fit. I wanted to make sure they could get in there without having to take it apart. So, I love that cookie with the bite taken out of it. Call it the Cookie Monster table. So then I moved on to working on the top. So I cut it to length. So this is what the top looked like when I first got it. It had a lot of kind of splinters in there. So I cleaned it up with the pull saw, and then I switched to some hand sanding, and then got the rest of it out of there just with a hand file. So here I am marking out some bow ties using this little 3D printed jig I made, and then cutting the cherry chunk out of there. And then I got some awesome footage of the back of my arm cutting those bow ties out and cutting them in half. And so I laid out some blue tape. I find it really hard to see the pencil on the walnut. So I put the blue tape down, then I used CA glue to keep the bow ties from wiggling around, and then I cut them out just with the marking knife and then peel off the tape. Gives you a nice crisp line that's easy to see. So then I marked them with dots A, B, and C with some arrows up so I don't get them mixed up. And then marked real crisp lines with the chisel just to make sure everything is set real nice and crispy. So then I switched to a 1/4-inch spiral bit in the plunge router, and then I'm setting the depth. I put a little scrap piece onto the work surface. It's probably about 1 millimeter, and then I use the actual bow tie to set the stop on the plunge router. The little scrap piece that's sitting between the bit and the top is just to make sure that the depth of the bow tie doesn't go below the top of the work surface, because then I would have to sand the whole top down. And that would be a lot of extra work. And then I just went back in with a chisel and kind of brought it right up to that first chisel line. And kind of took out the corners first, that's where the most material is, and then just kept test fitting until they felt like they were snug, but not too snug. As I moved on to the second one, you can see a little better here and kind of see how the freehanding process goes. I went around the outside first, and then I went to the inside, and then I dropped it down, about an 1/8 inch per pass. And then I move on to the next one, finish that up, and then go back in with the chisel and kind of get all that extra material out that I was didn't get perfectly with the router. So the router really just kind of sets the depth and takes out a lot of material, but the real work is making it nice and sharp and crisp to match those bow ties perfectly. So we're getting close. I got it like 99% ready to go. So I cleaned it out, did some test fitting. I think the first one and the third one were working, but that middle one was still a little hairy. So I had to do one more little chisel with it to get it out, get it all nice and clean. So then I move over back to the disc sander and put some chamfers on the bottom. Just makes it, kind of guarantees they'll go in. You don't want them to get stuck, so it kind of gives them a little more help. It gives a little extra room at the bottom for the glue. So I spread the glue out. I tried really hard not to get glue on the top. And then of course, there's a little drop sitting right there. And kind of just drop them in, try to keep them nice and square. They like to tilt on me for some reason, I don't know why. So got them in there and pulled the glue tape off. And then I sanded them down. Actually tried using a hand plane, but for whatever reason, like the cherry, it was just chewing it up. So I just put some 60 grit on there and took them down so they were flush with the top. And then I switched to hand sanding for the edges. It was taking it off so fast, I kind of got nervous, so I just broke all the edges by hand. Went back to the frame, did the same thing, so it matched the old one. And then I went back, kind of went through the grits, and I went up to, I think, just 120 all the way around. Did all the sides. And then for attaching, I got kind of lazy and just put 3 screws down the middle. I feel like that way I didn't have to worry about the expansion across the width. If I need to, I could add some more fasteners that, kind of allow for some seasonal movement, but it felt pretty solid with just the 3 down the middle. Same thing with the shelves. I just put 2 in the little cookie, and then I'm just going to do 1 in the center. The big one is pretty pinned in there, so it can't spin. So I feel like that one is going to be pretty safe just to keep in there like that. So yeah, there it is, all assembled, ready for finish. So look at those nice bow ties. And I love how this little step turned out with the radius there. I think it's really nice. So I'm going to bring the table outside just to check for anything I might need to touch up. It looks pretty good, so I brought it back inside into the house to put some finish on it, just using an oil here just to kind of make the grain pop, give a little protection. You can see the grain really kind of pop out, come to life. You can see that in the contrast between the cherry and the walnut, and that variation. It's quite lovely. So just kind of rubbing it out by hand. There's probably a better way, but I don't know, it's just the way I've been doing it. It seems to work pretty well. So there it is, all oiled. Just let it sit for a little while before wiping off any excess. And that's one more table down. So next time I'm going to work on this little cafe table. You probably saw at the beginning of the video. It's this concrete and steel table I made a few years ago. I found the base in an alley, and then I made this little concrete top with 2 different types of concrete. I'm going to replace the concrete with this walnut slab. Probably going to do a couple bow ties in the end, and then kind of flatten the top, and then maybe fill some cracks with some glue or epoxy. Yeah, and that's it. So stay tuned for next time. Like and subscribe.